Xiaomi's very first tablet was released way back in 2014, and since then we've seen Mi Pads ranging between 7.9 and 10.1 inches in screen size, from the very first Mi Pad up until the Mi Pad 4, which was announced back in 2018. It's now been 3 years since the last Mi Pad, but Xiaomi is finally back with this, the Xiaomi Pad 5, which is their largest tab to date at 11 inches in terms of screen size and boasts a WQHD Plus resolution, 120Hz refresh rate, quad stereo speakers with Dolby Atmos, a Snapdragon 860 chipset, a massive 8720 mAh battery, and more at a starting price of just €349, which is less than half the asking price of other tablets with similar specifications. Of course, we get that 22.5 watt charging brick in the box, and that's about it other than the charging cable that we saw. Here is the Pad 5 itself, but we'll get to that in a sec. For now, we got to turn our eyes to the Xiaomi Smart Pen, which cost €99, a bit much if you're asking me, but it is quite an interesting piece of kit, and you're definitely going to want one for your Xiaomi Pad 5. In the box of it, we get an extra piece, an extra pen tip over there, and that's definitely going to prove useful when this other one gets worn out, if it actually does. And here is the pen itself, nice matte black hard plastic. It is 152 millimeters in height and 12.2 grams. It has a primary and a secondary button and has a TPE replaceable soft pen tip. And now that that's out the way, it's time to unwrap the star of the show, the Xiaomi Pad 5. The Xiaomi Pad 5 comes in two different color variants. I have the pearl white version. You can also pick it up in cosmic gray, which looks pretty awesome too. This one has pretty much a gradient finish that goes from a white into a pinkish look. There's an 8720 mAh battery under the hood, 22.5 watt wire charging, a 7nm Snapdragon 860 CPU, 6 gigs of LPDDR4X RAM, and 128 or 256 gigs of UFS 3.1 storage. Unfortunately, there is no cellular options available for the global markets, though we do have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth 5. The display is made of glass and the back is made of plastic, unfortunately, but this is a pretty cheap tablet, so we'll forgive them in that area. Fortunately though, we do have an aluminum frame. It is just 6.85 millimeters thick and 511 grams in weight. At the back, we are treated to a 24 millimeter 13 megapixel OmniVision OV13B10 sensor. It has an aperture of f2.2, and Xiaomi have decided to keep the same design of the Xiaomi 11 and Mi 11 series, but I think a flush design where there's no protrusion coming outside of the backplates would have looked a lot cleaner. The 13 megapixel main shot looks actually pretty decent. 2x digital zoom doesn't look half bad. 5x looks better than some smartphones I've seen. 10x is the max digital zoom we can do here, but there's still a fair decent amount of detail. No portrait options this time around, though portrait mode still looks pretty great when a subject is nice and close. We do have 4K at 30 frames per second when recording here. No 60 FPS option, even though the chipset is indeed capable of it. It still looks nice and clear. We also have 1080p. Unfortunately, once again, no 60 FPS option, though 1080p and 4K, like I mentioned, look nice, clear, and crispy. Definitely wouldn't be able to tell this is actually coming from a tablet. That back cam setup doesn't look the best, but it takes fantastic photos. We have a volume rocker on the right hand side, a magnet holder and charger for the Xiaomi Smart Pen, which is nice and nifty, something that we've seen from other companies. We have a first and second microphone on that side as well. At the top we have a power button, and next to that we have a third microphone. Other than that, we have the first and second quad stereo speaker setup, the other two at the bottom. We have our fourth mic over there, and we also have a USB 2.0 Type-C port. On the left hand side we have 3 pogo pins for an optional magnetic keyboard, and of course at the top of the display sits the selfie camera. The 27mm selfie cam is indeed an 8 megapixel OmniVision OV8856 sensor with an aperture of f2.0. The selfie snap doesn't look quite as good as the rear photos we took earlier, though it still picks up a fair amount of detail, and unfortunately once again no portrait mode option, though guys, this is a tablet, so you'll have to forgive them for the optics. This device is not necessarily made to take photos and videos. What's up guys, Technic here, recording a 1080p at 30 FPS video on the brand new Xiaomi Pad 5. Though this device is not necessarily made to take photos and videos since it is a tablet, you can rest assured knowing that it takes more than decent enough video footage using the selfie cam so that you can video call your friends and family. Even though this tablet is not necessarily made to take selfies and back cam pictures, but like that guy just mentioned, the photos actually come out surprisingly well on a tablet, which should be decent for video calls. We do have 2D face unlock, unfortunately no fingerprint unlock, which is a bit of a bummer. And we do have an 11-inch IPS LCD screen. Unfortunately, it is not AMOLED to keep the price down. It has an 11:10 aspect ratio. It is of course WQHD plus and has a pixels per inch count of 274. It can reach a max brightness of 478 nits. And of course, we also have 120 Hz refresh rate and 240 Hz touch sampling rate. The colors are truly accurate and looks pretty darn good for an IPS LCD screen, actually more accurate than that of a saturated AMOLED panel. And it is fairly bright, I would say, mainly for use indoors. And the side borders are actually pretty symmetrical with top, bottom, left, and right. Of course, we have that 120 Hz refresh rate, 240 Hz touch sampling rate. Unfortunately, there is no auto or adaptive refresh rate, though when in the refresh rate menu, it does mention dynamic refresh rates. So this could be a feature coming forward in a potential software update, maybe MIUI 13. Of course, we can adjust the brightness over here. We can also flick between reading mode, so you pretty much have a Kindle on hand. We also have adaptive colors, which adjust the colors to ambient light conditions, which is awesome. And of course, we have dark mode, though it doesn't really seem necessary since this is an IPS LCD screen, not an AMOLED screen. So if anything, it's going to use more battery and not necessarily less battery. Of course, we have MIUI 12.5.2 for Pad. Xiaomi calls it for Pad, but it seems pretty much exactly the same as MIUI 12.5 we've seen on smartphones. Like we can customize categories within the app drawer, as well as lock apps, which you can pretty much do on all smartphones and tablets these days. Multitasking is great, but it does work better when you rotate the screen sideways, which is where this tablet truly does shine. The multitasking is great, though I think it could do with a couple upgrades in a future software update. And yes, Google is fully integrated with Google Discover on the left-hand side and Google Assistant swiping in from the bottom left corner. Using the pen to swipe in from the bottom left corner, however, creates a screenshot, though it is a bit gimmicky, sometimes popping up with Google Assist as well. The Smart Pen itself is easily paired with the Pad 5 over here, connecting through Bluetooth, and we have 240 Hz sampling rate, like I mentioned, and a 4096 level pressure sensitivity level, which is awesome in terms of flagship level styluses, which we've seen on the likes of Apple and Galaxy tabs. It takes 18 minutes to charge the pen, and it lasts for about 8 hours. With a 1 minute charge, you get 20 minutes of usage, but unfortunately, it will not work at 0% battery life. So it is just an active stylus, but it still does a great job, like I'm showcasing right here. The other button that we have on the stylus can be used to create a screenshot, and you can cut strange shapes into your screenshot if you're into that. Looks pretty cool, I guess. And of course, you can also write and it will translate it into text, which does a pretty decent job as well. I haven't seen any haptics on this device, but we do have quad stereo speakers. So how does it stack up to some of the best sounding Xiaomi smartphones around? We do have game turbo like we've seen on many Xiaomi devices rocking MIUI 12, and of course you can throw in a floating window when playing a game, as well as other useful features such as visual enhancements, display enhancements, upping the brightness as well as the saturation. I'm not too into that. I prefer to see what the devs actually have in hand when it comes to gaming. Starting with our first game here, Genshin Impact on the highest possible graphics, max frames per second. We're hitting between 26 and 50 frames per second, which is not so bad with such a heavy graphical enhanced game. Next game here is Bullet Force, an unlimited frames per second cap. The previous game had a 60 FPS cap, and the Pad 5 is hitting between 95 and 121 frames per second, which is absolutely phenomenal on a tablet with 120 Hz refresh rate. Moving on to Real Racing 3, though the game does support up to 120Hz or even exceeding that in terms of frames per second, unfortunately the Pad 5 does not have 120 FPS support for this game yet. But what about benchmarks? Well, that Snapdragon 860 is the star of the show. We do also have LPDDR4X RAM and UFS 3.1 storage. Of course, we're going to be testing out that 8720 mAh battery and see how it drains in terms of milliamp hour per minute drainage from the start to the end, as well as how hot this tablet gets. And we've been running through AnTuTu, Geekbench, and now we're about to jump into 3D Mark Wildlife over here to stress test the GPU in a 1-minute GPU benchmark test. And getting to that battery drain result, it drained by 5% and got a rating of 24.2 milliamp hours per minute and only went up by 4 degrees in Celsius, which is impressive to say the least. When it comes to AnTuTu, it got a score of 568,328 points, which puts it above Samsung's recently introduced Galaxy Tab S7 Fan Edition with almost less than half the points, but slightly behind the 7nm Plus Snapdragon 865 and 865 Plus chipsets. Once again, it trails behind the Snapdragon 865 Plus and 865 chipset, but this time around with Geekbench, it also trails behind the 8nm Snapdragon 850G chip, which actually got a higher single core score compared to the Pad 5's 504 points, though the Pad 5 did indeed get a higher multi-core score of 2,352 points when compared to the device just above it. And moving on to 3D Mark Wildlife, where we test out just the GPU performance, it got a frames per second count of 20.6 and a score of 3,435, putting it slap bang in the middle of all these other devices. The Xiaomi Pad 5 is an absolute stunner thanks to its pearl white gradient finish on its backplate, and as much as I wish that backplate was glass or aluminum, it's hard to complain when it's priced so darn well. Of course, that smart pen adds to that aesthetic by clamping down on the right edge of the tablet, and while it offers great build and usability, I feel that $99 for a stylus is a bit too much to ask for when the Xiaomi Pad 5 itself costs just 3 times that amount. The quad stereo speaker setup is certainly one of the Pad 5's strong points and is capable of great lows, mids, and highs thanks to Dolby Atmos. The camera setup on the rear is in line with Xiaomi's 11 series smartphones, and while it makes sense and looks appealing, isn't very practical due to it creating a rocking effect when on a flat surface and takes up unnecessary space since they have managed to make space for 2 lenses but only included 1. The included 13 megapixel camera, however, does take more than decent photos and videos. The front of the Xiaomi Pad 5 is where the tablet truly shines, thanks to the simplistic MIUI software skin and of course that breathtaking 11-inch WQHD Plus display, which is powered by a massive 8720 mAh battery and powerful Snapdragon 860 chipset. The 120Hz display on the Pad 5 is nice and fluid and makes gaming on this massive screen even more enjoyable. The star of the show, however, is the integration of the Xiaomi Smart Pen, which aids a 4096 pressure sensitivity level and 240Hz sampling rate. It's unfortunate that the pen isn't bundled in the box, but even without it, the Xiaomi Pad 5 is the best smart pad ever to release at this price point. This is Tech Nick, and I'll catch you in the next one.